Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. We want to welcome you all to the 2021 Post-Fire Recovery Grant Program webinar. I know some folks are still trickling in, so hopefully this is a good timing for everyone, but just wanted to introduce myself. My name is Rachel Thompson, and I am the Post-Fire Recovery Specialist here at OWEB. And I am joined today by Ivy Clark-Henry and Renee Davis, who I will let them introduce themselves. Ivy, if you want to go first.
Hi there, I'm Ivy Clark-Henry. I am an admin specialist with the Oregon Watershed Enhancement Board, and I'm just here for troubleshooting and to help out when I can.
Thanks, Ivy. Renee, go ahead.
Good afternoon, everyone. Renee Davis. I'm the Fire Klamath and Drought Programs Manager at OWEB. Thanks for joining us this afternoon.
Great, thanks. So before we get started, just a few housekeeping items I wanted to announce. As you may have heard, the webinar is being recorded and it will be uploaded to the OWEB YouTube account following today's session. It'll also be available on the OWEB website for the 2021 Post-Fire Recovery Grant webpage. So folks will be able to view this webinar in the future and feel free to refer to it as you're going through the application process. As you probably noticed, the audio and video capabilities have been disabled for participants today. So if you have a question that you would like to have answered, please use the Q&A feature that is on the Zoom webinar page. It's just the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen. And so just feel free to type your questions into there throughout the webinar. We may not answer them necessarily in the exact order that they're received, but we will get to all the questions before finishing up the webinar today. And Renee and Ivy are going to be monitoring that chat to make sure that we get to all of them. Finally, just following today's webinar, an FAQ will be created that will capture all of the questions that we went over today. And this will be available on the grant offering webpage. So I just encourage all potential applicants to check that webpage out for this document and then for the other program guidance documents that we'll be going over today. So with that, am I missing anything, Renee?
Nope, you've covered it. Thanks, Rachel.
Great, thanks. All right, so we'll go ahead and get started. And Ivy, okay, great, you made us a co-host. So I'm going to share my screen. And Ivy, Ivy or Renee, are you able to see my screen?
Yep. Perfect.
So I just want to direct everyone to the program webpage. So this is just OWEB's website. And when you log on to the home screen, you'll see that there are the grant program offerings and the post-fire recovery grants are pretty prominently placed. You just want to remind everyone that there are two programs for post-fire recovery. Make sure that you are in the correct one. So in this case, the 2021. It should be pretty apparent once you're in there which one you're in, but I do just want to make sure that folks realize that there are two and that there are some pretty substantial differences in the eligible activities and some of the program information. So just make sure that you're in the correct page. So for the 2021 Post-Fire Recovery Grant, just a little bit of background here. These are general fund supported dollars that were approved during the 2022 Oregon legislative session. And these grants are really intended to support on-the-ground natural resource recovery for areas impacted during the 2021 fire season. So there are some differences between the general fund grants and some of the more traditional OWEB grants that folks may be familiar with. In this case, these are really supporting the following activities, which is soil stabilization and erosion control, detection and treatment for invasive species, reseeding and replanting, in-stream habitat restoration, and then culvert repair and replacement. And we'll go into more of that and some of the specifics and some of the things that folks should be aware of about these eligible activities a little later on. This should look pretty familiar in terms of who the eligible applicants can be. Did just want to highlight this piece here, which is that a state or federal agency may apply as a co-applicant with one of these other eligible entities. However, cannot be a state agency or federal agency cannot be the lead applicant for these projects. And then this piece here of just again prioritizing non-federal lands, that really is the legislative intent here. These projects should be working on private, state, or tribal lands. County lands are also included in that. However, if, for instance, the project is kind of taking a large landscape approach, kind of an all, lands considered approach with the project, and part of the work may touch on federal lands, that is something that we can discuss on a case-by-case basis of including into the grant application. But we just ask that folks meet with us prior to submitting that application so we can kind of go over it and make sure that everything kind of fits with that legislative intent. So here we have the list of the 2021 post-fire recovery grants, the eligible activity or the eligible fire areas. And for folks that may have some familiarity with the 2020 post-fire program, I did just want to highlight that one of the differences with this program is that you are allowed to come in and apply under multiple fire areas. So not just a single fire. And this might not make sense and probably won't make sense for a lot of the fire areas. However, in areas where there were adjacent kind of large complex fires and the work might occur on multiple, we do ask that you include all of those fire areas into the application, and then also just highlight in that application where the work is occurring, and just that there's a detailed map and includes what restoration activities are included in which fire area. So again, just want to reiterate, and I'll reiterate this many times, but just the fact that these dollars are really for on the ground restoration. That being said, we understand that there will likely be some need for late stage design and permitting with some of these projects. And so if those are activities that are in coordination with what will be an implemented project within that application, that is okay to include within your application for reimbursement. Just the design and permitting cannot be standalone activities. They need to be paired with implementation. So moving on, I want to talk really quickly about this piece. There are similar again to the 2020, if folks are familiar with that. Part of the evaluation criteria goes into needing to point to an assessment or analysis that addresses the post-fire 2021 post-fire impacts to the project areas. We understand that there's not quite the same level of federal analyses and reports that have been given to the 2021 fire areas. So anything that can point to those on the ground impacts of the 2021 fire season, whether those are federal, tribal, or local assessments, will be accepted. But they do need to point to how the impacts have been seen on the ground, and then how that ties into the proposed restoration actions. And if you have any questions about what an appropriate assessment might look like, feel free to reach out to us. If you have any questions about what would be an eligible assessment, we're happy to talk about that. So this is a really important piece, and I'll touch on it briefly here, but we'll also talk about it a little bit later on. Again, because these are general funds sourced grants, there are some kind of unusual pieces to it that are a little different than some of the other OWEB grants that you may be used to. So these funds typically have a 2-year lifespan, meaning that these dollars will need to be obligated during the 2021 and 2023 biennium. which means that they will need to be obligated before June 30th of 2023. And we'll talk about this a little bit more, but I will asterisk this by saying that we are requesting carry forward authority, which would extend the lifetime of those funds into the next biennium. So if granted, that would have a final date of June 30th of 2025. So again, we'll touch on this briefly, but just going into this, knowing that there are some limitations on the use of these funds. And next on here, and we'll go into some of these program materials more in depth here in a moment, but just want to highlight some of the other pieces on the webpage. This is the program guidance for the 2021 fire program, and we'll go into this in just a moment. This piece is the 2021 Go Big, which is guidance in budget and granting. And we'll go into that briefly, but some other pieces that we won't get into today that I do encourage folks to look into, especially if they have questions, is this general online application guidance. This is a really great document that goes into how to navigate the OWEB online grant management application system, some troubleshooting for folks that may not have been an OWEB grantee before and need to request a username and password. This document goes into a lot of that. And then finally, this is the Go Big document for just the standard OWEB Go Big guidance, which discusses kind of more broadly the budgeting and finance piece of larger OWEB grants and are not necessarily specific to the 2021 program. Once we get through the webinar today, we will be putting the webinar here on the website as well as an FAQ document like I mentioned before. So continue to check back the website for updates to that and be able to access that in the future. And then this is maybe one of the more important pieces, which is the how to apply for the grant. And as you all probably know, the application opened on September 1st. And then there is a deadline, a strict deadline of 5 p.m. on Thursday, October 20th. And our hope is to have award decisions made within approximately 6 weeks following that application deadline. So folks should have a pretty good idea going into the December holidays whether a project has been approved for funding or not. We do want to just highlight this as well, just given the amount of money that we have available, which is $5 million, and just the range of fire areas. Do just want to highlight that we're not anticipating having an additional second grant cycle. However, that decision will be made following this current cycle. Just depends on what kind of submissions we get and what those projects look like. So that decision isn't final necessarily, but it is also not anticipated that there will be additional grant cycles. Finally, just want to highlight that this is my contact information here. So as folks are going through the application process, if you have any questions about anything related to the application of the program, criteria, eligibility, that type of thing, please reach out and I would be happy to speak with you over email or phone or anything. So with that, I will pause and see if there are any questions, knowing that we will continue to go through a little bit more in depth on the program guidance and the budgeting guidance.
No questions at this point.
Okay, great. So I'll move on to the program guidance. And some of this we've already gone through. Again,
hey, Rachel. Could you
yeah.
zoom in a little bit on this one?
Yes.
Thank you. Much better. Perfect. Yep.
Perfect.
Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Renee. So again, just to reiterate that these are intended to support on-the-ground implementation activities in these kind of general criteria or these general activities here: soil stabilization and erosion control, invasive species, reseeding and replanting, in-stream habitat restoration, and culvert repair and replacement. And then these are the fire areas, which again, you may apply under more than one. But I do want to just add that this is intended to be for, again, those fires that are adjacent to each other. Not that I would anticipate seeing a whole lot of this, but not like a statewide approach where you're going to be applying to a fire, for instance, like the Bootleg fire and the Skyline Ridge fire. They're pretty far apart, and applications are really intended to be for kind of targeted restoration actions within a landscape area. Did just want to highlight some of these specific pieces on those eligible activities. Again, late stage project design and permitting is an allowable activity as long as it is paired with some of these other eligible activities that were discussed here above. With the early detection surveys for invasive species, that is allowed, again, if paired with treatment of invasive species. So this cannot be a standalone activity, but as long as it's paired with control and treatment, that is an allowable activity. I do want to highlight this one because I do anticipate there potentially being some questions about fencing. So exclusion fencing is eligible under this grant offering as long as it is paired with replanting or one of the other restoration activities that is going to help kind of take a holistic approach to restoration project goals. So there cannot be, and an example of this might be that, because we've heard from some folks on the ground about this, that there might be some areas where you're seeing good natural regeneration, and so you're not necessarily needing to do a real extensive replanting project, but do want to have some exclusion fencing for, excluding livestock from that area. That would be allowed. However, we would want to talk to you about that before you submit that application, just to discuss what you're proposing and make sure that that's a good fit for this, and that the eligibility would be there. There should not be standalone fencing that is proposed with an application. So we want to see that paired with on the ground restoration in another manner. And just to make also very clear that it is only exclusion fencing that's allowed with this grant offering. Boundary and other fencing types would not be eligible for this. So happy to talk about that more if folks have questions. And again, would just request that people come to us with some of their ideas on that before they submit an application, so we can discuss what you're proposing before that application is submitted. And this we talked about already, that multiple fire areas can be proposed within a single application. Just ask that all of that information is included and it's made very clear about what work is occurring where and within which fire area. So this is kind of going back to the fact that these are general fund dollars and do have a little bit of a tricky timeline attached to them. Because there is only the guarantee at this point that we have, that the funds have to be obligated by June 30th of 2023, that makes it a little tricky for being able to plan out your projects, which we understand. Again, we are asking for carry forward authority and are hopeful that we will receive that, and that will extend those dollars into 2025 by the 23-25 biennium. However, in your applications, it should be made clear what you can accomplish or what you anticipate being able to accomplish within the June 30th, 2023 deadline, and what you would hope to accomplish if given carry forward authority. And this is obviously a fairly large range of time, which is why we say, anywhere from 6 months to like 2.5 years. However, that is unfortunately reality, and we won't likely know about carry forward authority until potentially as late as this upcoming spring. So just something to keep in mind for folks. We'll talk about this a little bit more, but just wanted to also highlight that with these emergency funds, the match requirement is not the same as some of our other OWEB grants. And so there is not a 25% match requirement. It is encouraged, and if folks are able to bring that in with their applications, that's great. However, don't want that to be a deterrent for applying for these dollars if that's not something you're able to feasibly do. Moving down into this section, you'll see some kind of bold red text here, and that is because this is important. The deadline for these grants, as I said, is October 20th at 5 p.m. You just, given some of the tech glitches that can and have unfortunately happened, we don't want folks to be scrambling last minute. So we highly encourage folks to get those applications into our online application system at least 24 hours in advance if possible, just to make sure that there's not any last minute glitches that occur. Unfortunately, it's a strict deadline of 5 p.m. So if something happens and you're not able to submit, we cannot make exceptions on getting those applications and accepting those applications. Also want to discuss this quickly. So given that we recognize that there are a broad range of impacts, and it's a broad geographic scale as well, the 2021 fire season. That being said, equal distribution of funding is not a guarantee. Just given the fact that there are so many differences in impacts and severity of the fires, that's not something that we're designing in this program. And to that effect, there is no cap that we have placed on an ask for these dollars. So, there's no maximum that you have to request or minimum that you have to request. We recognize that in some cases there may be a good reason to have a high dollar application, and there might be some other situations where it makes sense to have a lower dollar. And so just want to make that clear to everyone that there will not be considerations given for kind of equal distribution of that. However, we do also just want to ask, because there is that $5 million allotment for this program, if you do anticipate coming in with a really high dollar ask, letting us know and kind of discussing that with us, just so we can kind of track where we're at with the program. We've discussed this. So again, the 2-year life cycle, just keeping that in mind and making sure that in your applications, you're very clear about what you're able to accomplish within the 21-23 biennium, and then again, what you're able to accomplish beyond that if given carry forward authority. This piece is important to keep in mind as well. These dollars cannot be used for activities that would be required under any other existing regulations. So for example, the Oregon Forest Practices Act. And if you have any questions on that piece, or whether something would apply, again, just reach out and we can discuss that. Also want to highlight this piece about local partner coordination. So as much as possible, it's encouraged that local partners on the ground be collaborating and incorporating kind of those collective activities into one single grant application. That is the encouraged approach. However, understand that there may be reasons why you would have multiple groups working within a fire area, but just thinking about how you can target those high priority natural resource recovery actions into a single application is encouraged. This is just a reminder about making sure that you, as you're going through the online application system, reviewing all the guidance on the webpage, what we're discussing today, making sure that you have a good understanding of what the criteria are, And then in the online application system itself, there are a series of I-buttons and other informational pieces in there that give good information and guidance. So just making sure that you're staying up on, what is being asked and are able to provide all of the uploads and everything that's needed to successfully submit your application. So this is about billing, and just to say that we will have quarterly billing requirements and reporting for grants. I'll talk about this a little bit more in the Go Big guidance, so I'll leave it until that point, but just knowing that there are some billing and reporting requirements associated with these grants. So moving on, the grant evaluation process, and this should look pretty similar to other OWEB grants that folks may have had experience with in the past. These are going to be evaluated based on the OWEB Restoration Grant evaluation criteria. And I want to just highlight a couple of the things that are specific to the 2021 program, which is that these need to, the proposed restoration activities need to be prioritized and identified in an assessment. Again, those federal, tribal, or local assessments. The expected benefits from the project in addressing post-fire impacts related to soil burn severity, erosion risk, vegetation mortality, encroachment of non-native species, flood risk, and fish or fish passage barriers. So those are just some examples of pieces that you may find in an assessment that you can relate back to the proposed activities. The organizational capacity to successfully implement the project during the limited time frame. So again, that limited time frame being of June 30th of 2023, and then what could be accomplished within an extended time frame if carry forward authority is given. Also, a ability to demonstrate coordination among local partners within the fire affected area. So again, we encourage folks to come in and have that on the ground collaboration with local partners as much as possible. Finally, coordination with federally recognized tribes. That is something that we want to see with these applications as much as possible. Also recognizing that tribes, a lot of tribes have their own capacity issues right now, and that may not always be possible or feasible. However, would like to see some level of coordination with tribes given some of these fire areas. The grant applications will be reviewed by a technical review team, which again is pretty consistent with other OWEB grants. And the review team is comprised of agency staff who will have on the ground knowledge of the 2021 post-fire impacts and what those recovery needs are. And also folks that have experience with organizational capacity and the partnership considerations for planning and successfully implementing restoration projects. We are being very mindful about who we are asking to be on the review team, knowing that there is a wide range of impacts. And again, that geographic scale of the 21 fire season is so varied. So we are being very mindful and finding folks that have either themselves very intimate knowledge of the 21 fire areas, or are connected with folks on the ground that can help them get the information that they need to be successful in evaluating these projects. Finally, just want to highlight a couple of these additional resources for applicants. This is the online application guidance, which is really helpful for just figuring out how to get onto the application system and just general application questions folks may have. This is the link to the some video resources and training documents that may be really helpful for especially newer grantees. It's a great resource that I encourage folks to check out. And then this is a really useful tool that I would encourage people to check out if they have not already. This is the OSU Extension Fire Programs Oh, I clicked on it. This is the OSU fire programs after the fire wildfire map tool. And there's a bunch of really great information in there about the 2021 fires, and also links to some assessments and other data like soil burn severity and other things that may be useful to you as you're putting together your application. And so I think I'll pause there, and I think I do maybe see some questions in the Q&A. So we'll go ahead and stop, and Renee and Ivy, if you want to field some of those questions.
Yeah, so one of the first questions is culvert repair and replacement limited to streams, or are drainages and or ditch relief culverts also eligible?
Yeah, so they're not limited to just streams. That could be for drainage purposes as well. I think we would want to, potentially we would want to discuss what that would look like, within the project area. But no, that would be something that would be allowed. It does not have to be in stream.
Perfect. And question number 2, we're working with the Ochoco National Forest on recovery from the Grandview fire, which occurred on U.S. Forest Service and PGE. I understand that this opportunity is primarily for non-federal lands. What is the tolerance for an application for projects on federal land if it's in conjunction with work on private land?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And I unfortunately don't have like a steadfast rule for that. Again, the legislative intent of these is that the majority of, that these funds are intended to be used for on the ground. And I see Renee has popped on camera, so I'll let her respond if needed. But, the intention of these is to not be used on federal lands. If there is, and it sounds like there is, coordination of work happening on private land in this case, I think it would have to be kind of a case-by-case basis, and we would need to know more, and we would want to talk a little bit more about that and what that would look like. It should not be a majority or even approaching a majority of the funds that are spent on federal lands. And Renee, I'll go ahead and let you jump in if you have anything to add.
Rachel, that was spot on. The only piece I would add is just being mindful of the influx of recent federal funding that is available, and really wanting to understand if state funding is proposed for use on some modest amount of federal lands as part of an all lands approach, just kind of understanding what the federal skin in the game is, if you will. So definitely, I think that's an example, as Rachel noted, where just a detailed conversation about that particular proposed project would be really helpful, so we can make an appropriate determination that's in line with intent of the state funding. Thanks.
Yeah. So yeah, if you have more specific questions and would like to discuss that more, whoever asked that question, just reach out and we can certainly discuss a little bit more in depth and give you a little bit more tailored answer.
Perfect. Thank you, Rachel and Renee. Last question is, does replanting include site prep, meaning debris, burned tree clearing? We are generally not planning on planting private lands without site prep due to access hazards.
Yeah, so that's a great question. Yes, site prep could be included as part of that. Again, as long as the end result is that replanting will be occurring. So we shouldn't see folks coming in with just site prep. And again, there might be a little bit of leeway on this in certain cases where maybe you're seeing really good natural regeneration. But we would want to discuss that again a little bit more in depth about your specific project in that case. But yes, site prep generally is allowed as long as there will be replanting activities kind of paired with that.
Perfect. And we have another question that just was entered. Could dead and burned cutting buffer be paired with fencing? We have had landowners start building new fence, but efforts are hindered as dead trees fall on the new fence.
I might ask Renee to jump in here a little bit and see if you have thoughts on this. I think this might be another scenario we'd probably want to talk about it with you on that specific scenario. Again, the intention with fencing is that it's paired with some of the other eligible activities that we discussed, so replanting, and invasive removal, that type of thing. In cases where you're seeing kind of removal of debris, and understandably then needing to do fence replacement, I think we would need to know a little bit more about the larger project proposal and kind of the other landscape level things that would be proposed. And Renee, I don't know if you have anything to add on that.
Rachel, I would agree. I think this is one where we would want some more site-specific understanding of the activities. And I think just to underscore what Rachel flagged earlier, the intent with the fencing is exclusion fencing to help with really getting these fire impacted areas on the right regrowth trajectory as opposed to boundary fencing. So that would definitely be a piece of the conversation we would want to have. So please just follow up as you're developing the proposed project so we can talk through those eligibility pieces. Thanks.
Perfect, thank you too. There are no further questions right now. Do you want to wait for a moment to see if any more come through?
I think we'll go ahead and move on to the next piece, but knowing that there will be more opportunities for folks to ask questions kind of throughout this next portion. Even if it touches on what we just discussed, happy to answer more questions. So the last piece to go over today is this Go Big guidance on budgeting and grants.
Rachel, could you zoom again?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thanks, Renee. I forget that not everyone is looking on a large screen like I am. So hopefully folks can see this. So again, this is the link to the larger OWEB Go Big document that goes into much more detail about everything related to budgeting with grant applications and grant projects. So encourage people to check that out if you have questions. What we're going to go over just now is very specific to some of the nuances that are associated with the 2021 post-fire recovery program. So again, because these are general fund source dollars, there are a little bit more just considerations to include, again, that on the ground work piece. And because of that, the emphasis really being for on the ground work, just keeping those indirect and other kind of project, non-implementation project costs to a minimum is really important here. So the probably biggest piece to discuss on this that is going to look very different than a lot of other OWEB grants is this first one here about eligible costs and activities having a retroactive date of April 4th, 2022. So this is obviously fairly unique. And basically this would allow anyone who has done any work on these 2021 fire areas that is, fits within the eligible criteria we have discussed, can be eligible for reimbursement up to that April 4th date. And that is just simply the date that the governor signed the bill. So that's the significance of that. But the fact that, receipt requirements and everything else remain the same as any other OWEB grant is important. But knowing that you have that retroactive cost reimbursement date is really different and probably welcome news to a lot of folks. A couple of pieces that are not allowed with these grants, contingencies are not allowed, and also promotional items and extensive stakeholder engagement activities are not allowed. And the stakeholder engagement activities, just to discuss that a little bit more, and this would again be something that we would want to discuss with folks if you're anticipating including some level of stakeholder engagement. There is some room for kind of late stage outreach So not necessarily stakeholder engagement, but like if you're in a late stage landowner outreach, where you're, kind of finalizing details for doing on the ground implementation work that will follow that outreach activity, that is something that there is likely room for and space for in these grants. But we would want to talk to folks about that and kind of get a sense of what that means and looks like for your specific project. But broadly, stakeholder engagement activities and kind of large mass mailings, that type of thing, are not allowed with these grant dollars. Equipment purchase is allowed, and as our equipment usage rates, those are allowed as well. So grantees may charge OWEB for equipment rental rates, just knowing that, we'll need to have determinations made to make sure that, how those rates have been sought is reasonable. So that will be something that is just something to keep in mind as you're coming up with budgets. The indirect costs, again, just with the intent here being that these are supposed to be on the ground dollars spent for implementation, indirect costs are capped at 10%. And that is regardless of any other negotiated rate. So just keeping that in mind as well when you're going through your budget. The last piece here is post-grant costs. So they are not allowed, but just to make sure that folks know kind of what that means, because there have been some questions in the past about whether plant stewardship, for instance, is a post-grant cost. That is not. So plant stewardship would be considered just part of the grant. And it makes it a little tricky with these because of the timeline, but that would be something that would be eligible for cost in these, just knowing that that would only be in the event of carry forward authority if we get that into the next biennium. So just something to keep in mind, that the post-grant costs do not include plant maintenance and plant stewardship. And then finally, again, this is just to remind folks that there is a quarterly billing and reporting requirement associated with these that is a little bit more extensive than a lot of our other grants are, so that may look a little different. The main reason for that being that we are wanting to track progress and be able to give updates to the legislature if needed, just to make sure that folks are making progress on their grants and that the dollars are being spent. So with that, I think I've covered everything, and I do want to pause to see if there are any other questions.
One just came through.
Okay.
If we hire someone to do the restoration work, could something like plant maintenance be included in their contract, even though it is post-grant?
Yeah, so in that case, yes, the plant maintenance would be something that you could include in the budget. But again, knowing that these funds have to be obligated, how it stands right now, these funds have to be obligated by June 30th of 2023. If carry forward authority is approved, then that would go out to 2025. And so that would be eligible. So it becomes, I guess, a question of, taking on that, putting that into a contractor's, space to see if that's something that they could do in the event that there may not be funding going into 2025.
Perfect. Thank you, Rachel. There are no other questions right now.
Great. Well, I'm just kind of going through my notes, and I think I covered everything. I guess I'll just ask Renee to chime in if there's anything else I missed.
You covered all of the items that I was expecting. I would just certainly encourage folks, though, as you're digesting all of this great information that Rachel provided, if questions come up on specific aspects of a project you're contemplating, please do feel free to reach out and talk through your ideas with OWEB staff.
Yeah, thanks, Renee. Yeah, and I was just going to kind of end on that note as well. Just really want to encourage folks to reach out with any questions that you have, whether it's on, the program criteria and eligibility, what we've discussed today, or just going through and have kind of more project specific questions. Just know that I'm happy to talk with folks. So please reach out and use us as a resource. For next steps, like I said, I will upload this recording to the website. So feel free to go on there to check that for when that's uploaded, along with an FAQ document that I will put together based on some of the questions we received today. And then again, just making sure that you all look at the other documents that are on that webpage. There's a lot of really great information there. So with that, I just want to thank you all for attending today's webinar, and hope you all have a great day.